Senator Pangilinan, Senator Cruz, Senator Tina Muñoz Barnes, Senator Rory Spicio, Senator Frank Agun, Senator Tom Adai, Senator Matt Rector, Senator Frank Blas, and yourself. There is a quorum.
Thank you very much. Imina Trenta na Liheslaturan Guåhan is called to order. I would recognize the Majority Leader, Senator Respicio.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I move to adopt the agenda dated January 9, 2009, with the exception on item 9 where it says messages from the governor. This agenda reads none, but there are messages. So that would be the only amendment to this agenda.
So on the motion, without any objections, so ordered. I'd like to ask Senator Agun if you can lead us in a Ifresi. Members, you all have a copy, should have a copy on your desk. Not after that.
Sisters, Madam Speaker. Ginini mastakulu gihina soku, imastakulum gi corazonhu, zani masfigu na ninasinya who ofrece maisazu para bairro portei, za who defendi, ihinengi, i cultura, i linguahi, i airi, i hanum, zanitanu samoro. Ni rensokku, diretsu gininazu stata, esti hua fitna gihilo i Biblia, zani banderahu, i banderan Guåhan.
I'd like to also ask Speaker Ben Pangilinan if he can lead us in prayer.
Sisters, Madam Speaker, ginanitata lahinya del Espiritu Santo. Amen. Diyos Tata, nuevo na sakan, nuevo na legislatura, lo parewa iguinaiza, ni minago, ni man matampago gwini na ogan, para bin setbi itaw-taw Guåhan, ni mon wanayam ni estina pudet. Pwede mon sinya un ina todo y tempo y corazon mami, y hinason mami, y antin mami, ja un fanuiham i diretso na tsalan, ni dinansi na tsalan, ni para bin spia empeño na para bin na mas maulik inilala gwini tanu esti as Guåhan. Esti ingagagaw gini ni yonayam na leksyon siya gini ni laimu as Jesus Kristo ani manahita gwini gitano jan i sakrifisyon niya ani humano tati gizahago. And no ingagagaw lokwi gininas na niya si Maria za it pwede sinya esti na leksyon todo uspia za ugiha i aksyon mami za ufanu itaw-taw Guam na interes niya siya mas 3 kilo gwini ipison na legislatura imina 30 na legislaturan Guåhan. Si Diyos masi dan sana masi kinanitata ilahinya dan Espiritu Santo. Amen.
Si Diyos masi, Speaker Ben. Senator Adai, can you please lead us in the Guam hymn?
Tus protein
Teletype, will you please lead us in the national anthem?
By the dawn's early light, what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleam, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, for the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave for the land of the free and the home of the brave?
I'd like to ask the clerks to please take roll.
Senator Adai. Senator Uggan. Senator Blas. Senator Calvo. Senator Cruz. Senator Espadon. Senator Guthertz. Senator Munya Barnes. Senator Palacios. Senator Pangilinan. Senator Rector. Senator Respicio. Senator Taitagui. Senator Tenorio. Senator Speaker Wampet.
Present.
Madam Speaker, wish to report there is a quorum.
Thank you very much. The chair recognizes the majority leader.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I call for the approval of the Legislative Journal dated January 5th, 2009, subject to corrections.
On the motion, without objection, so ordered.
Madam Speaker, there are communications and petitions. I move that they be appended to today's session journal.
On the motion, without any objection, so ordered.
Madam Speaker, there are messages from the governor. I also move that those messages from the governor be appended to today's session journal.
On the motion, without any objection, so ordered.
Madam Speaker, there are no reports of standing committees nor reports from select committees. Under introduction and first reading, Madam Speaker, I move that Bill number 1 LS to Bill number 31 LS be considered having been given its first reading. And Resolution number 2 to Resolution number 4 COR also be considered having been given its first reading.
On that motion, without any objection, so ordered.
Madam Speaker, under motions and subject to your calling us into session, there are two resolutions that I'd like to place on the second reading file. The first one is Committee on...
One moment. I understand that you also missed a couple more resolutions.
I'm sorry.
And
Resolution, legislative certificate 1 COR to 3 COR. I'm sorry, I also move that they be considered there.
there's more.
There's more?
32 COR, Bill 37.
Oh, Bill 32 to Bill number 37. Madam Speaker, I also move that they be given their first reading, and resolution, legislative certificates 1 through 3 COR be also given its first reading. I apologize.
On that motion, without any objections, so ordered. And did you make a general motion also for congratulatory?
Yeah, I move that all resolutions introduced in today's legislation session be given its first reading and that be adopted with all senators as co-sponsors, and that to authorize the legal counsel and the author of those resolutions to make necessary amendments.
On that motion, without any objections, so ordered.
Madam Speaker, I also like to move that any Committee on Rules resolutions received by the Committee on Rules that are of commendatory, congratulatory, or condolence in nature, I move that the clerk be instructed to convert those Committee on Rules resolutions to legislative resolutions so they can also be adopted. And if I could just explain very briefly,
Yes, please.
what my understanding, what's been happening in the past is that if a senator introduces a Committee on Rules resolutions, which it would be if we're not in a legislative session, and it could be of commendatory or condolence in nature, and then immediately when we have session, we as senators know that there'll be a general motion to adopt those resolutions. It's quite conceivable that another member might just introduce that resolution so that he or she can get a number in the legislative session resolution, and so that senator who wanted to have this condolence resolution be adopted, that you would have one member preempting another member. And so in discussions with the clerk, I then said that I would make a motion so that it's clear that any resolutions introduced while not in session, if they're pending adoption by the Committee on Rules, and for some reason we have session like today, then those Committee on Rules resolutions will be introduced as legislative resolutions so that that author would not lose his opportunity to either commend or congratulate or give condolences to those family members.
On that motion, Senator Tenorio, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I just want to make sure I understand what's happening then. The Committee on Rules resolutions introduced outside the legislative session will automatically convert to legislative resolutions once the legislature, what exactly is the effect of the motion?
Senator Respicer, do you yield?
Yes, the chairman on rules will forward those pending Committee on Rules resolutions to the clerk so that it would be automatically adopted. But I'm saying that by a general motion to allow for resolutions to be automatically adopted while we're in session, what's been a past practice of many legislatures ago is that you could have Committee on Rules resolutions pending with the Committee on Rules, because now we have to have a voting sheet, and then when the Speaker calls us into session, and it has happened in the past, Madam Speaker, where you have another senator with that same resolution with the same subject matter beating that senator who has a Committee on Rules resolution pending. And so it's a first come first serve system, and so that legislative resolution will be would take higher precedence than a resolution from the Committee on Rules that is pending.
So Madam Speaker, then I understand the motion to be that any pending resolutions in the Committee on Rules will, if not acted on by the time legislative session is called and we convene session, will automatically take precedence over any resolutions of identical nature introduced during that legislative session. Is that correct?
The clerk
All right,
is,
that's
saying
fine.
yes. Yeah. Okay, so Speaker Ben, you had your hand up earlier? Or?
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'm just not sure. I understand the resolution, but I guess I'm not even sure. Is that an amendment? Is that a
motion?
A motion? Is it a motion for this session? Is it a motion for the standing rules? Because for just this session. Because I think if we're going to formalize that, I would like, I think so that everybody understands the rules. And I think but I also think it's a little bit, maybe because I'm the oldest, or the oldest one that's been in this hall, I guess, in terms of term, that in the past there's really been legislative resolutions are extraordinarily, not ordinarily granted as a normal course of business, that they mean something extra special because it's adopted by the entire body, and that there's a lot of screening, maybe you might want to say, that goes into that, so that it takes its rightful place as an action of this body in it, where it's being presented and to who is receiving it, as a great distinction. And the Committee on Rules is the more informal process, which may not have that same screening. So I guess what we're doing now is there's no distinction between the two. And if that's the will of the body, that's the will of the body. But in the past, a legislative resolution adopted by an entire body is meaningful. And I think, are we doing this? And just, I don't want to use the term cheapening, but are we, it's like the police qualifications. Are we lessening the standards and diluting maybe again, it's not that, maybe some people we give letters and don't even want them, but I think it should be something, distinguished. And if we're making it run of the mill, then I think we lose some of the meaning in terms of when we honor people of distinction for their achievement and their contribution to the community, and it becomes run of the mill. So whatever the will of the body is, but from an historical perspective, I would like to offer that as food for thought for the body when it adopts or it debates whether we're going to make this motion as be the standard practice in all instances. And that's my thoughts on that. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much. Senator Respicio?
Madam Speaker, even though I may be the youngest member of this body, I'd like to share my historical perspective on what's usually is the case in the legislature. The only distinction between a legislative certificate and a Committee on Rules certificate, the Committee on Rules, Madam Speaker, also takes time to screen these resolutions, and I don't want to dilute or say that we're operating a resolution mill in the Committee on Rules. What I'm simply offering for the body's consideration is to protect each member's right or wishes to express condolences or give resolutions of congratulatory in nature. So in one aspect, in some semblance, the retiring speaker is correct that when you introduce a resolution and we're not in session, that resolution will then be introduced in the Committee on Rules. And so it would be parentheses, COR, and it's kind of like a process that the Committee on Rules is authorized to still be the business arm of the legislature while we're not in session. And so if you have these rules resolutions that are pending adoption and you call us into session, Madam Speaker, the retiring speaker is correct in a sense that a legislative resolution is of much more meaning per se because it was adopted by all 15 members rather than just the 12 members of the Committee on Rules. So if you're a recipient and you see a legislative resolution that had 15 members look at it versus just 12, then maybe you might feel a little bit more special, but it does not take away the legislature's ability to express these commendations or condolences whenever and wherever necessary. What I'm attempting to do is right now you have several Committee on Rules resolutions pending adoption because they have to be routed and voted upon. But because you called us into session, theoretically, another member may beat that member who's already undergoing this Committee on Rules process, may beat that member to the punch by going straight to the clerk, as we speak, and file that resolution, and it's a first-come, first-served basis. My motion simply says to allow the Chairman on Rules to take all these Committee on Rules resolutions that are pending adoption and to present it to the clerk as legislative resolutions so that it could, so that member won't lose its place in wanting to have these resolutions adopted. You might think that we're making something out of nothing, but really take some time, spend some time with the clerk, and she'll share with you her own experiences where one member tries to outdo another member, and if we don't adopt this motion, we will allow for those kinds of processes to occur. But the Committee on Rules, we do take our time and do our due diligence in screening these resolutions so that it's not a resolution that's just given to anyone and has no significant meaning. And so I ask consideration on the motion so that it just makes for a fair process for all of our members.
On the motion, I'm going to call for the vote. Please raise your hands unless there's no objections. There's no objections? Okay, so ordered. Senator Respicio, we are now...
Madam Speaker, we have which copies have been made and presented to each member. I'd like to move to place on the second reading file a Committee on Rules resolution, and it's relative to amending Rule 6, Section 6.04.06, Imina Trenta, Liheslaturan, Guåhan standing rules. And I'd like to put that in the second reading file.
On the motion without objections, so ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to place resolution number 3 relative to amending Section 6.04.04.02 and Section 6.04.04.04.03 of the Mina Trenta, Liheslaturan, Guåhan, Oten, Reglamento. I'd like to place that in the second reading file.
On the motion without any objections, so ordered.
Madam Speaker, I also have made copies of your memorandum dated January 8 to all senators from you, and it's the appointment of temporary chairpersons. I would then move to have the following elected by this legislature, and I would like to do this under motions. May I be permitted to make the nomination?
You're going to place it first on second reading.
No, we'll do this under
you want to make
motions.
under motions?
Yes.
Okay.
So, Madam Speaker, pursuant to your temporary appointment of the following individuals, I move then that Senator Vicente Ben Pangilinan, Chair of the Committee on Appropriations, Taxation, Banking, Insurance, Retirement, and Land, that yourself, Speaker Judith T. Wampat, EDD, Chair of the Committee on Education, that Senator Matt Rector, Chair of the Committee on Labor, the Public Structure, Public Libraries, and Technology, that Senator Frank Uggan Jr., Chair of the Committee on Economic Development, Health and Human Services, and Judiciary, that Vice Speaker Benjamin J.F. Cruz, Chair of the Committee on Tourism, Cultural Affairs, Youth, and Public Broadcasting, that Senator Tina Rose Muñoz Barnes, Chair of the Committee on Municipal Affairs, Aviation, Housing, and Recreation, that Senator Adolfo Palacios, Chair of the Committee on Public Safety, Law Enforcement, and Senior Citizens, that Senator Tom Adai, Chair of the Committee on Utilities, Transportation, Public Works, and Veterans Affairs. You missed me, and that Senator Judith P. Gutherds.
Because you were already nominated.
But I was only selected for rules, yeah.
Okay, so...
Is that what was trying to happen, Madam Speaker? You didn't temporarily appoint me? Let me finish.
Because you were appointed already. But
My
I
heart's
think it'll be a good
breaking,
time to do that.
And Senator Judith P. Gutherds, DPA, Dr. Gutherds, to chair the Committee on Guam Military Buildup and Homeland Security, and notwithstanding your memo of temporary appointments, that myself, along with chairing the Committee on Rules, it be
Can you give us the
my
next?
committee?
Natural Resources. You forgot the name of your committee?
I'm afraid to make that motion because, along with chairing the Committee on Rules, I also chair the Committee on Natural Resources, Federal, Foreign, Micronesian Affairs.
Yes, that's in the standing rules.
Yeah.
Okay, on that motion, are there any objections? No objections, so ordered. Very good. Congratulations, all of you. So we're now on second reading file. We have Resolution 1, and the Chair recognizes Speaker Ben Pangilinan.
Sidismasi, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to move that Committee on Rules Resolution Number 1, relative to amending Rule 6, Section 6.04.06 of Imina Trenta, Liheslaturan, Guåhan, be placed in the third reading file, and I'd like to discuss the resolution.
Yes, please proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Resolution 1 is, in its face, fairly simple. In its operation, very simple. And in its effect, I think, sends a great message to the general public with regards to the policy that this body has when it considers matters before the body. It would amend the standing rules that would add a new line in the Rules 6.04.06 relative to the addition of unrelated items on the annual budget bill. Right now, in our current rules, unrelated items may be placed on the budget bill. And while I understand and can support that, I wanted to extend it a little further with regards to some limitations on when these unrelated items can be placed on an annual budget bill. The current standing rule and the current statute basically prohibits bills from being considered by the legislature which contain more than one subject matter and shall not contain unrelated subjects or pertain to multiple projects. Basically, no riders of unrelated items on a regular bill. And this is a bill that this subject matter I had introduced back, I think it was in my second or maybe it's my third term. And since the beginning of my term, I had a lot of consternation in working on the legislature and trying to concentrate and base my decisions on single subject matters. Maybe that's because I couldn't multitask, and that's why I decided maybe we shouldn't be doing this. We shouldn't be multitasking and considering different items all at the same time, and limit the discussion to what is presented before the public and what the public has had an opportunity to comment on. And it was tied, of course, into public consideration and openness and transparency. There were many times in the early part of my career where bills that were introduced of one subject matter all of a sudden continually evolve, and riders are attached that are not related at all before the bill itself, and that not only are they not related to the subject matter of the bill, but no input from the public was ever solicited, and no public hearing was ever sought and received from the general public during a public hearing process. They were just placed on that. And so I introduced a bill that would prohibit that. I wanted to go all the way. But sometimes, Madam Speaker, you can't go all the way. And so at that time, I was able to convince my colleagues that didn't want to go all the way, to at least go partial way. And that was on, let's not do it on regular bills before the body. And so over time, that worked for us. And the public was very much satisfied with that small progress that we made in ensuring that we don't do things without consulting them and without giving them an opportunity to let us know how they feel. That they thought that this was a more transparent way, and it was a fair way of carrying out our duties in here in defining our relationship with the public and ensuring that they know what we're doing. You know, transparency is not letting the public know what we're doing, what we've done. The transparency to me means that we let the public know what we intend to do. We ask for their opinion, and then given the input that we receive from them, we go on and then carry out our duty of making decisions that will affect the operation of this government and basically affect life on Guam. Not every bill, is so basic, but all of them affect the people of Guam, and they deserve to be consulted. So when we close that loophole, basically, in terms of riders on regular bills, a new door opened, or more advantages were taken with regards to budget bills. And budget bills became what everybody terms and understands out there as Christmas tree bills. And it wasn't Christmas tree bills because of the money that was appropriated, but it was a Christmas tree bill. It was because there was then this vehicle where we thought that the policy of doing things out in the open, consulting the public, giving them an opportunity to influence and give us their feelings and their thoughts on proposals before this body was now being circumvented through this annual budget bill. And so the annual budget bill became the vehicle for putting in all these riders that the public has not had an opportunity to comment on and to give us their thoughts. And because of the nature of the annual appropriation bill and the annual budget bill, it even became worse than before, Madam Speaker, because, as you know, we do budgets, and invariably we do them, no matter how hard we try, we do them at the last minute, we do them in the middle of the night, literally. And there became, under the cover of darkness, this more shelter from the ray of open government, where things invariably get placed on these budget bills which are not related at all to the budget and are of special concern and so forth by members of this body, and they get placed on this not only now without any public input, but out of public sight, because we tend to do them in the middle of the night. And that's what I want to present to my colleagues for consideration is, let's not do that. Not that we can't act on matters that are unrelated to the budget, because I understand there may be some although I personally can't think of one, but I may have been guilty of doing it in the past because it's been allowed. But with 10 committees now, with 10 Democrats, I'm sure that there's nothing that comes before this body that, with the power of the chairmanship, that we won't put before the public for consideration. And so I only would like to ask my colleagues that if we're going to put something on the budget bill that is unrelated to the budget, at least, at the minimum, let's make sure that that subject matter has been presented before the public and they've had an opportunity to comment on it. You know, Madam Speaker, and it's something that I was not able to do and convince and get to as a rule, but you know what? We were able to do it in the 27th Guam Legislature. We were able to, as a Democratic majority, decided that we wanted to be more transparent, that we didn't want to, even though the law allowed us to do it, as a body, as a Democratic majority, that we weren't going to take advantage of that and leave the public out in the dark. That we were going to set a standard for ourselves that is higher than the statute. Now, can we do that? I believe so. I believe if this body collectively decides that openness and transparency is our primary policy goal in this body, and consultation of the public on matters that will affect them are going to be implemented and sought, that we can do it. Even though the statute allows us to be more liberal, we can, in this case, to my Republican colleagues, be more conservative. That we can be more conservative in protecting the public's right to know and protecting the public's right to ensure that they have the opportunity to tell our leaders what they think about matters before this body that will affect their lives. And so I'm asking my colleagues to make that consideration, you know, Madam Speaker. And I know that, again, Madam Speaker, it's partly maybe because of old age that I've been in here longest, and somebody may invariably get up and say, what, he doesn't want to do it now, but he used to do it in the past, and maybe I forgot I did it. But if I did, maybe but if this rule is in place, can guarantee you I won't do it. You know? So I'm asking my colleagues to make that consideration. I want to bring, you know, things and remind this body what this kind of thing can lead to, you know. It can lead to, you know, banners behind the governor and things like blackmail budget, because we're putting in there something that has nothing to do with the budget, that has no public hearing, and we place the governor on making a decision on the budget that is going to be complicated by an unrelated matter that has not had the benefit of public input. The goal we should have is in the budget bill is to have, as streamlined a budget as we can, that every single member can focus their attention on what is the allocation of the resources and how are we going to administer those resources in the policy that we set in the budget bill that we pass, and limit at least the unrelated matters, as much as we can, as much as we want to as a body to hold to a standard for ourselves. But if we have members of this body that are able to get the support to put these matters in there, at least let it be after consulting the public and having them let us know what they think about it, how maybe we can change it to make it better, and how it will affect their lives. I just have to reach far back, and I'm not going to reach all the way back because maybe my memory fails me, but at least I'll go back. Last budget cycle, we had a proposal that came in literally in the middle of the night that would have set aside that would have allowed the setting aside of $11 million, let's say, for legal fees out of highway funds. We didn't know about that. It got placed, and only by asking these questions in the middle of the night were we able to ferret out what the effect of that would have been. And $11 million out of federal highway construction fund can probably pave or repave from Ilig Bridge to Inalahan. But yet, the proposal that was presented with this body without public scrutiny was we were going to put it aside for legal fees out of construction funds. And so, thankfully, that didn't happen. We've heard what happened, and we hear the people on the radio, for example, when they called, and when we made the change on the Gotali site, and I pleaded with my colleagues to at least in that process have a public hearing process. And that's really been what the public has said. Sometimes they're not telling us, don't make the decision. They're just saying, give us the opportunity to let you know how it's going to affect our lives. And that's what this amendment would do. It would set that policy in its rule by this body, that when we're going to do things or act on things, that we will act on issues in which the public has been consulted on, and we have had the benefit of their counsel and their wisdom, and we would know how it would affect their lives, and then we would make that decision. So I ask my colleagues for consideration of this, and of course move it to third reading as I have reiterate my motion. Thank you, and Sidus Masi, Madam Speaker.
On the motion, please state your point of inquiry. And is your mic on?
I notice that we have resolution number 1 here, and then the same subject matter is bill number 34. I presume. I don't have a copy of the bill. My only question is, we're going to discuss this resolution, which is a substantive resolution, and if it fails, do we then go back and have a public hearing and go through the same discussions all over again? Or if this resolution is passed, does it moot this? I just need to have that clear in my mind.
And who would you like to direct that question to?
Well, I guess, I don't know, legal counsel will be the appropriate person to address this, but we have basically a resolution and a bill that have been introduced that's wanting to do the same thing. So, it's kind of like, if we don't get it here, we'll have a second bite of the apple. And I have no problem with that, but I just need to know.
My understanding from legal counsel is that the resolution would not impact on the bill, and the other is that the bill itself, I forgot the rest. What about the bill? The bill does not address the standing rules.
No, but you see what basically the resolution does is it actually makes an amendment to an existing law which allows the putting on of amendments, unrelated amendments on a budget bill. And I think certainly the sponsor has brought up some very valid points, and I think it does raise the bar, and it sets better standards, and I think it's a substantive nature that why don't we then have Bill 34 publicly heard, and let's have that public input, which the speaker, the sponsor, has certainly given a lot of credence to, and so do I. And why don't we just, I would like to see that we address the issue that way. I mean, we're going to discuss it in here, a very substantive issue without benefit of any public input. And if public input is very important, I guess that's why the sponsor has also introduced Bill 34. So I think maybe we should just go ahead and entertain Bill 34, since this seems to be duplicative in nature.
Senator Franklin, you wanted to respond?
If I may,
Yes.
and it's just a procedural matter. The reason why there's a resolution and a bill is that this body can adopt this as part of its rules. And that means those rules only bind this body. It doesn't bind the next legislature and the next legislature and so forth. So if we adopt the resolution, we definitely, as a policy statement from this body, vote for this kind of transparency. When we address the bill, that is a legal addition to the statute that would then affect the next legislature, and not only that. See, because if we only put this in this here now, then the next legislature can decide not to put it in the standing rules. So I wanted to put this in the rule as a policy statement and an operative management statement from this body, that's the standard we want. And then the statute and the amendment to the statute would be a statement that this body wants for all future legislatures. So that's why there's kind of it's done in that manner. So I hope that assists my colleagues in their consideration.
Thank you very much. Senator Cabo, you ready? Or you raised your hand? On the motion?
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, again, some of the issues that have been discussed, as a matter of fact, we go even back to some of the major impasses that occurred in the 29th Guam Legislature in regards to the standing rules and the Guam Code annotated and the Organic Act. And some of the members of the body can recall some of the discussions we had in trying to interpret the Guam Code and the standing rules. There were certain areas, again, and of course it was a different subject matter, a subject matter which was silent in the law, but was made very clear on the standing rules, as well as in the Organic Act in regards to leadership positions. And this one, there is, again, clarity in where you have the Guam Code annotated, and then you have a particular resolution that, if adopted, would be contrary to what is contained within the law. So there is this legal issue that needs to be addressed. But as for the resolution in itself, I want to thank the good senator for introducing it, because this is something I, as Ways and Means Chair over the past 2 terms, I'd always understood as a given. And with that, and that's why I'm not too sure where I'm going to go on this, it's a double-edged sword. When I was finance chair, and whether it was as a full majority, which was the first half of the 29th Guam Legislature, or the second half, in which we had the Democratic Party in majority, there were provisions put in miscellaneous, and whether it was on the original bill that had been submitted or on the floor, that I had some major concerns about. And with that, because of the importance of the passage of a budget bill, and because the majority of my colleagues had moved forward for that provision in the miscellaneous area of the budget, I was forced to weigh what is the greater good. And so there's one particular provision there, man, I had some real major problems with, but also at the same time, we had a budget bill that, in my opinion, as a whole, was important enough to vote for and to vote in the positive. The other end of it, and this is where I'm kind of torn, in this last budget bill, there was a provision put that would reverse an earlier bill that had been enacted into law, in particular to the criteria for hiring within the government of Guam, and whether an individual would have a diploma, at least a high school diploma or GED. What was passed through the regular process, which was the introduction of a bill, going through a public hearing, and then passage, I was not in agreement with. But in the budget bill that I ultimately did not vote for later on, there was a provision put in, and I thought it was a very good provision. It was a provision put in by one of my senatorial colleagues in the 29th Guam Legislature, because of the input that individual had received as chairman from different members of the community, and it was a provision that would reverse that earlier law, and that would then restore the original mandates in regards to the qualifications of an individual being hired by the government of Guam. I didn't vote for the budget bill, but I sure as heck liked that provision, because we wanted to raise the bar and ensure that we send a message also of the importance in education. I've been, in fact, there may be other colleagues here that have been here longer than me. The good senator that introduced this piece of legislation is a veteran, has spent more time in the legislature, and has that experience. I'm probably, I would think, this is my fifth term, I may be the second, probably the second or maybe third, in terms of being a veteran. And this is not easy. I'll be interested in hearing the debates on both sides, but it's a double-edged sword, Madam Speaker. It's a double-edged sword. It's been, and again, based on that provision, it's been used as a tool in the budget process, and it's in the law, and it's been used as a tool that has ultimately put benefit to this community. And at the same time, it has also been used in the past, and people have made mention of that thing at the dead of night. It's been put in there, provisions in there that may be contrary to the better interests of the people of Guam, because it did not go through a public hearing. So, Madam Speaker, at this point, I'm still weighing where I'm going to vote on this thing, other than, again, it raises questions on tradition of this body and of the Guam Code annotated. And with that, it will be the members of this body, and whether we vote for this or don't, that will have to answer to ourselves, to the members of this body, and to the people of Guam, into whatever provision is placed into a budget bill. And with that, there may be good and there may be bad. Again, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I look forward to the discussions and dialogue and debate in regards to this particular amendment, or this particular resolution.
Thank you very much, Senator Culver. Senator B.J. Cruz, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this really is a point of inquiry, and I'm hoping that well, it's a combination of both. I agree with Senator Adai that this may be premature, that we might be better served if we went to a public hearing, and I think that would be evidenced by the question that I'm going to raise at this point. The issue of having had prior public hearing, I'm wondering if that is within the Minatenta, Liheslaturan, Guåhan, or only within that legislature, or can it be with a prior public hearing, like if we have a supplemental bill in February of this year to address shortfalls in the government or whatever, and there was a public hearing on a matter in November of 2007, would that suffice as having had a public hearing, or must there have been a public hearing subsequent to January the 5th, 2009 in order to qualify as having had a public hearing? And the reason I pose that question, Madam Speaker, is I'm aware, like in the U.S. Congress, more specifically with the War Reparations Bill, that it came out of the last Congress to the next, to the Senate on consent calendar with having waived the public hearing, because a public hearing was conducted in the prior Congress, and sometimes the congressional committees and Congress itself can sometimes waive another hearing if there was one prior, and just accept the minutes from that hearing as the hearing for the bill in the current Congress or the current legislature. And I remember that specifically from the War Reparations one, and I'm just wondering whether or not, having had a prior hearing, whether or not it's only for that legislature itself, or if it had had a hearing in a prior legislature, and is it only going to be just one legislature back, or can it go 4 legislatures back? Because the example that the proponent of this measure brings up was a measure that was an amendment that I had proposed, but it was a public law, and it had a public hearing. It had been passed unanimously by 21 people in the prior legislature. I'm just wondering, it's not clear in this when the public hearing was, or within this legislature, or can it be in a prior legislature? And so I'm not sure if it's appropriate at this point to be discussing it, or whether or not these things might be ferreted out if we had a public hearing and receive public input as is being proposed as the underlying reason for this amendment. Thank you.
Would you like the author to yield to respond to at least one of your questions?
If possible. If not, I just say that it might be premature. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, if we do it as an amendment to this rules, the rules of the 30th Guam Legislature that we're seeking to amend govern the actions of this legislature. So when it says shall have been the subject of a public hearing under the rules of this legislature, then it would be for only bills that have had that has received a public hearing by the 30th Guam Legislature, because these rules are only applicable to the 30th Guam Legislature. And if we wanted to change that, then I agree that maybe when we do the committee as a whole to set standards for future legislatures, that may be at the time that is discussed. But what we're discussing here is the conduct of this legislative body, the Liheslaturan Guåhan, in the standing rules that were adopted by this body, and how are we going to conduct ourselves. So it would be necessary to add this to this legislature's standing rules in this amendment, in this fashion, and I would say, and give my intention maybe, if not interpretation of what this amendment, if adopted, would mean, and where would it apply to. And my interpretation would be that the public hearing would have been conducted, or should have been conducted, by the 30th Guam Legislature, because the rules only govern the actions of the 30th Guam Legislature. Thank you.
Vice Speaker Cruz, who's okay. Senator Palacios, and then Senator Tenorio.
Make a motion, Madam Speaker.
Well, I have
Just a motion.
Senator Palacios on the list, and then I'll go to you. Yes, I have you listed. Okay, then please
Madam Speaker, move to recess till 2 p.m.
recess until 2 p.m. Are there any objections? Okay, so we're going to recess then until 2 p.m.
We have a quorum. I believe the person that was speaking was, before we went into recess, was Senator Palacios. Senator Palacios, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would not disagree with earlier presentations with respect to the merits of transparency regarding, of course, the proposed amendment. But I believe, Mr. Speaker, that the current process by which emergency issues can be considered to the budget, to the annual budget document, is actually a mechanism that continues to enable this body to address emergency issues and things that perhaps have already been heard, and maybe this is the time to put it on for consideration and so that we can implement that. The current situation, the current law that now allow us to do that is a Guam statute, and it is my understanding that this practice is pretty much standard with respect to other legislative body, the U.S. Congress, for example. And I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, that there are good reasons why when this practice was adopted and continued to be practiced, that they consider those issues, the issue of transparency, the issue of the expedited process to accommodate public needs and so forth. I believe that the current process will yield more good than bad, if you will, Mr. Speaker. I agree with the senator from Mighty that this is a double-edged issue. And in that it can be abused, it can be manipulated to the detriment of public service. But I believe that the greater evil, if I may say so, would be the restrictive process by which members of the legislature can propose an amendment to an issue that is needed at the time to benefit the people. While the members might use, like I said, might abuse this, they still continue the safeguard in that any amendments, relevant or not, germane or not, would still be considered and debated on the floor individually by members of this body, and it would still require the support of 8 affirmative votes to be adopted. And at that time, if should an amendment be attached or proposed to be attached to an annual budget or to any bill for that matter, then it will be at that point when individual members of this body would evaluate and weigh that, whether this issue, and we have dealt with this before, whether this issue has to have a public hearing or not, because maybe the depth of the substance or the complexity of the process. And then during that time, we take it case by case and then cast our votes whether to pass the amendment or not. So there is the safeguards. This body has been very supportive of transparency since I served in the last 4 years. Mr. Speaker, there are several bills passed into law that require this body to post proposed bills, proposed amendments, adequate notice of this. We have come a long way. And again, I am not going to argue against the increased transparency But the downside of that, in my opinion, is that it restricts the process. It would limit the manner in which emergency issues can be addressed. Indeed, there is, of course, the so-called, notwithstanding the House rules and so forth. And yes, there's still the avenue to do whatever that we believe at the moment that needs to be done. But my main point here is that the current system is allowed by law. The current proposal would require this body to practice a standard that is higher than the standard set by law in Guam. It's a Guam statute. And in the years that I served in this body, there's more benefit that came about as a result of the use of this mechanism than there are disadvantages and abuses. And again, Mr. Speaker, if there's a member of this body that is tempted to abuse such mechanism, then the people of Guam ultimately will be the judge of that. Whether the action is not good in the interest of the people of Guam, it's not good for the people of Guam, and who proposed such an amendment. And that person individually will be held accountable. I believe in transparency. We are on live TV right now as we speak. And those are the improvements, those are the efforts of this body with respect to the issue of transparency. Mr. Speaker, I cannot believe and I cannot be convinced that the current situation, the present process is not transparent. It is transparent in my opinion. And I believe that it is sufficient and adequate to provide satisfaction to the people of Guam who can hear and observe what's going on in this body. And for that reason, I see no need to amend the standing rule as now permitted under the Guam statute, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Palacios. Are there any speakers on the resolution? Senator Adai.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I really have to agree with the sponsor of the resolution with many of the things that he had articulated earlier. Certainly, I don't think anyone in this hall will disagree about the need to maintain as high a level of transparency as possible. And certainly, one of the ways that can be done is by ensuring that we have a public hearing and everyone comes out to discuss the impacts or the concerns that they would have with a particular proposed policy. I also agree with him fully that it's very important that we get as much public input because we certainly do not have a monopoly of the right ideas in this legislature here. There are many subject matter experts out there, and there are many people out there in the community who have a certain perspective on an issue that we may never have thought about. And so, of course, their input is very important. So I think from an ideal standpoint, I can't agree more with I agree very much with everything that the sponsor of this resolution has said. However, I would like to bring it back and really in a world of reality that we are in, where it is not, it is not as planned and as orderly as we would like it to be. We've got to give ourselves that flexibility as a policy-making body to be able to address situations as they arise. And I think, granted, the sponsor of the resolution indicated that he can't think of anything so pressing that could not have had a public hearing. Well, neither can I. But I would like to give myself that flexibility for that 1% that's going to come up. And I would like to have that flexibility to be able to address that situation as an amendment. Now, I feel comfortable enough in the integrity of this body that we're going to police each other. I agree that if somebody tried to slip in an amendment without a public hearing to appropriate $11 million for some particular activity and hasn't had a public hearing, I mean, I too would throw up red flags in a heartbeat. But sometimes we're talking about things that are not as substantive, and that maybe doesn't really, I wouldn't say does not merit a public hearing or does not warrant a public hearing, but at least does merit some kind of discussion and consideration because of the time at hand. And so, you know, I really feel that this resolution is going to tie our hands and it's going to take away that flexibility that we have. And, you know, if anybody asks me, well, give me one example, I don't know. But I want that flexibility as a policymaker to be able to address situations at hand and with the concurrence of the majority of this body, be able to add that amendment on here. I agree that there are probably, I too have served in this legislature for 8 years, and I have seen amendments that have come through, which I did not, I certainly would not be supportive of. But then again, I may not have been supportive of that particular amendment, but if 8 other members of this body were, are we to say that they were, only I was right and they were all wrong? I mean, I think they also bring a different perspective. They also represent other segments of the community out there, which also have legitimate interests that need to be protected. And that protection may come through the proposal of an amendment at that particular time that the budget bills provide us the opportunity with. And finally, while I fully agree that it is ideal to conduct a public hearing on every policy that we want to deliberate on and subsequently pass, I think that we were also elected into this legislature as policymakers because the voters out there believed that we had at least some intelligence and some common sense and reasonableness to be able to deal with issues without having to always run back and say, well, what's your opinion? And which way do you want us to go? And I think at some point, we're going to have to take that particular burden on ourselves and make the best judgment that we can. And if we do not make the correct judgment, we'll certainly know about it come election time. So I think that at some time we have to take the bull by the horns and actually make that decision. It's ideal to be able to run everything through a public hearing, but that's ideal. And I think that in reality, you have to maintain your flexibility to be able to address issues. So because of that, Madam Chair, I really cannot support this resolution because I think that it will tie the hands of this legislature unnecessarily. But that, of course, is not to also, that does not in any way mean that I do not want transparency and that I do not value the public's input. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Adai. On the motion, are there any speakers? Senator Guthert, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and colleagues. You know, it's interesting what the resolution attempts to do. And I have to say I'm not supportive of it because I don't think I want to have my hands tied if there's something that I feel is very urgent to respond to in the interest of the community. It's not a matter of transparency, Madam Speaker. It's a matter of being able to respond to an issue or a problem that requires action. And everything we do here is televised. The media is here. There's no attempt to hide things. Now, in the last budget bill, there were a number of items included in that bill that I felt good about. One was restoring the requirement for a high school diploma or a GED or a certification as a condition of employment for new employees of the government of Guam. Also in that budget document was a critical need that we recognized, requesting that the public auditor immediately conduct an audit of the commercial leases being let out by the Chamorro Land Trust Commission. And the reason the senators agreed to include that in the budget is because we had received numerous complaints that leases were being let out by the Chamorro Land Trust Commission that possibly were not in the best interest of the people of Guam, and we wanted the public auditor to conduct an objective audit of those leases. There were other inclusions in that budget that responded to concerns in the community. Now, if we tie our hands by passing this resolution, I don't think that works in the best interest of the community. Every member of this legislature supports doing things the right way and doing what the law provides. We can only do what the law allows us to do. And the laws of Guam only allow us to include items in the budget bill and in a supplemental budget. And I think we should honor that law. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Gutherts. On the motion, Senator Tenorio, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in listening to the debate of my colleagues, it's refreshing to hear, of course, the new voices that are joined our hall here and to listen to the logic that is being applied to this resolution. And in listening to it, of course, we're talking about transparency and riders and non-germane matters. And I did a little bit of research with the assistance of our fine legislative minority counsel. And, excuse me, that's pretty loud. The findings were pretty basic that this originally became law in Public Law 24-160 in April 1998. And the original mover of this amendment is the author of Bill number 499, which eliminated all, basically, prohibiting the attachment of non-germane matters or quote-unquote riders to a bill. And I know that this stemmed, I think, from probably a great number of riders which were attached to bills prior to this process because of the criticism which, properly so, ensued as a result of not having public hearings on matters which became law by virtue of riders. But when this was done, I think it was recognized in that legislature that the only opportunity for that to occur was during the budget process because it's a long deliberative process. And again, it is also open to public scrutiny. So further, I did a little bit more research, again, with the capable minority legal counsel. And he had found that in the 27th legislature, there were 414 bills that were introduced. In the 28th, there were 411 bills. And then in the 29th, there were 406 bills. Total bills introduced per term. And maybe my math is a little off, I'm not sure, but using Microsoft Excel, it came out to less than 1/2% of the bills which are introduced have an opportunity to have a non-germane matter attached to it. Now, short of 100%, that is 98.52 or something in that range, because it's 0.048. It's less than 1% of the total bills are an opportunity for this legislature to address issues in a non-germane fashion attached to the budget bill, and one supplement thereof. So we're talking about a very, very finite number of bills. We're not talking about opening up Pandora's box and letting the floodgates go here with regards to germane bills, because, you know, the author in his original, or the mover that is, in his original bill, Bill 499 in the 24th Guam Legislature, you know, appropriately found that a lot of non-germane bills or matters should not be attached to a bill simply because you can. So they eliminated it, almost but eliminated it. This will eliminate it. And, you know, my good colleague, Senator Adai, was pretty on point with regards to not having that opportunity, not being able to represent the people of Guam in making decisions that come before us in what amounts to less than 1/2% of the bills in a non-germane matter being attached to the bill. I think the public has entrusted this body to be able to speak to issues and to have public hearings, even on substantive resolutions, of which this is one, and is going without public hearing. But the bill that was introduced, again, by the author, will have that opportunity to be heard. And of course, we'll be able to further hear from the public. But I think at this time, we're not really saying we don't want transparency. You know, as a matter of fact, it's just the opposite. I introduced a legislative transparency bill last term and expected to pass this term to make sure that everything is open to the public, to make sure that everybody gets access to the information as fast as humanly possible, given the technology and the financial constraints of this legislature, what we can provide to our public. Why can we not make sure that we do something in the way of giving ourselves one opportunity, and that is the budget per fiscal year, to go in and say we need to hear matters that are not germane to the public. And that is something that has happened, and I think the mover, along with many of my other colleagues in this body, has been dealing with every single term. You know, some senators have a distinct and profound aversion to having everything willy-nilly go into the budget. And, you know, the Congress does it. I think the vast majority of our nation's capitals does it. I can't say that emphatically. I haven't done enough research on this particular matter. But I think that we have to allow for some avenue to have conversations on matters. And if 8 members of this body decide during that budget process, or one subsequent amendment to that fiscal year budget, that a measure should be attached to it, I've seen it happen every single time. And that means to me, Madam Speaker, that it seems that the will of the body in prior legislatures that I've been a part of, as well as one preceding, up until the point of the passage of this bill, Public Law 24-109, I think it was, basically allows for this body to be able to make decisions with respect to placing non-germane matters. And at 1/2%, we're not talking about closing the public skies, Madam Speaker. We're simply talking about allowing for non-germane matters on 1% of the bills that we address. So I'm concerned about the closing of the loop, if you will, if you want to call it a loophole, if you want to call it whatever you want to call it. I'm concerned about giving this legislature the opportunity to be able to make a decision once, twice a year out of 400 bills to be able to add non-germane matters, which we all know and recognize and have voted on, which have gone to many of the budget bills that have come before us. So I'm still undecided on this, but I'm concerned about what the prospects of this will do, especially given the fact that the mover of the amendment is the one who originally authorized it in his bill number 499 in the 24th legislature. This is Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Tenorio. Are there any other speakers who would like to speak on the motion? Senator Respicio, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I really appreciate the discussions surrounding this resolution, and I want to say that I appreciate the author's intent for wanting to be sure that the legislature is as transparent as possible. I don't think you're going to find a single member in here that's going to stand up and say, no, I don't want to be transparent. I just want to be able to get my riders into a budget bill so that it can be expedient, so I can hide things from the public. You know, and we've heard other senators say that that's just the opposite. Sometimes, as a practical matter, when we are in a budget session, the budget bill itself, Madam Speaker, must receive a public hearing, so then that budget bill becomes eligible for placement on the session agenda. But our standing rules also provide that if it's an appropriation matter, that we must resolve into the Committee of the Whole. And at such time that we're in the Committee of the Whole, at any time, we've done it more than once, we've done it more than twice. In fact, it's probably a standard practice that any time there's a member of the body who'd like to move an amendment to that budget bill, that there's nothing that precludes the body from saying, I move to recess and bring the Attorney General in, or bring other individuals in, or even bring members of the public in. If you recall in a previous legislature, when there was a measure to increase the minimum wage, although that original bill had a public hearing, it was through the insistence of the senator from PD, who was the author of that bill, to force the legislature to address that issue. And there was apprehension from the chairman at the time, who said that we're not going to address this because the minimum wage would actually, raising it will actually hurt those who you're purporting to help by way of government programs. If you increase the minimum wage, then they may not qualify for food stamp, welfare, public housing. And so we said, well, bring them into the Committee of the Whole. And it was during this Committee of the Whole process where you had representatives from both sides of the issue, even representatives from the business community, who were able to articulate their position, but after much discussion and debate, we ascertained that you'd almost have to make $9.50 an hour in order to not become eligible for public housing assistance, and the threshold is even higher for food stamp and welfare recipients. What I'm trying to grasp with this, with the author's intent, is whether or not we want to set up a procedural process where if there's something that the legislature absolutely has to do. I know there's other mechanisms to waive the public hearing requirement by having you request for an emergency declaration. I also know that if this resolution passed and it's in our standing rules, there's also the proverbial notwithstanding the House rules, but I really don't, I'd like to use that motion sparingly and judiciously, so we don't always get up and just waive a rule that we're supposed to stand behind. I cite an example in this section that requires public hearings for resolutions. There's a public hearing requirement for resolutions if it's going to be transmitted to heads of state or members of Congress or President of the United States. We have a resolution right now that's been introduced by our good colleague who's the legislative secretary, and it's resolution number 2, and it's relative to combating human trafficking in our community and throughout the world, and emancipating the estimated 27 million people enslaved in today's world, with 200,000 of them in the United States, and preventing additional women, children, and men from being trafficked, and in order to encourage greater awareness of human trafficking and all other forms of modern-day slavery. And it's simply, there's just a resolve clause that the legislature declares on behalf of the people of Guam its opposition to and condemnation of criminally injurious activities which exploit persons in an economic or sexual manner, and recognizes the National Day of Human Trafficking Awareness as January 11th. We have a colleague who'd like to make this presentation at this ceremony on January 11th, but because it's going to be transmitted to members of the Association of Pacific Island Legislature's president, to the Guam Congresswoman Madeline Bradalio, and to other heads of state, then this resolution must have required a public hearing. How do you waive that statutory requirement? It's not an emergency. This resolution does not affect the health, welfare, and safety of our community. By way of it's just a resolution. It's not a bill to implement a program or have the governor have an emergency declaration so he can spend the money necessary to combat this problem. This is simply an expression that Legislative Secretary Munya Barnes wants the legislature to participate in an expression to say that we're against human trafficking in our community. But because of an earlier effort to require mandatory public hearings for legislation, for resolutions, because it's going to be transmitted to Congresswoman Berdalio, other heads of state, I think the legislature has missed that opportunity to express these wishes on behalf of the people of Guam. Missed opportunity, not opportunity to sneak something into an annual or supplemental budget, but a legitimate opportunity, Madam Speaker, to give the legislature's position with this particular issue. I also thought that maybe our standing rules cannot be inconsistent with local or federal statute, and I asked our Legislative Counsel to give me guidance on the matter, and I want to thank her for immediate response. And the Legislative Counsel said that she does not believe that if the resolution passes, that it would be inconsistent with the law, because there was nothing that would impede that bill from ultimately passing, but it would impede the ability for that amendment to get into the budget bill, unless, of course, there was a motion to standing motion to amend the House rules to allow for that particular amendment to make it in that annual or supplemental budget. So the copies of the Legislative Council's opinion has been provided to each of you, so we can all be guided accordingly. If the issue is, I'm concerned that if the resolution passes, it will be inconsistent with the law, then certainly the Legislative Council took care of that. But there's a lot of underlining issues, Madam Speaker, and the example I cited with the resolution, and the only thing I can do as a member of the legislature who tried to have this resolution adopted that the senator from Manila wanted, the only thing I can do is simply say, I'm sorry. Based on the mandatory public hearing requirement, we cannot entertain your resolution in session. I'm sorry, I cannot entertain your resolution as chairman on rules while we're not in session because of that mandatory public hearing requirement. And how much more apologies do we have to make to the people of Guam if in the event we needed to do something immediately and expediently, and the only vehicles available to us were the annual and supplemental budgets. In my past experiences, some of the things that I've been able to do in an annual budget is to have an amendment to require that the vehicle mileage reimbursement match the federal rate. I introduced a bill. At the time, that bill was never publicly heard, but during the budget process, especially in the 27th Guam Legislature, this is the one way that I was able to move these things one by one. And if I got 8 votes, it went in. If I didn't get 8 votes, it didn't go in. And my colleagues back then and even now have been able to tell me, well, Roy, don't you think it's better if you do a standalone bill and get a public hearing and then have that bill come to the floor? It took me no time to figure out that was the most diplomatic way of saying, I don't like that bill, so don't put in the budget, do a standalone bill, get a public hearing, and get in the legislature. And we know just how this legislative process is, and a lot of times, Madam Speaker, it's timing and it's opportunity to solve the problems that we were elected to solve. And there's nothing more than having that as a vehicle as opposed to wanting to have for greater transparency and accountability. It's about having the ability to be effective, and so I rise in opposition to the resolution.
Thank you, Senator Respicio. Are there any other speakers on the motion? Then I'm going to ask the author then and give him the opportunity to close.
This is Masi, Madam Speaker. You know, Madam Speaker, I'm moved by the arguments, but it still comes down to you can't be on both sides of the issue. You cannot be on the side of transparency and say you want to put a rule in this body that shuts the public out of the process. It's irreconcilable. You cannot say, I want to be transparent, but I want to also have the ability to tell the public that your opinion does not matter, and we're not going to listen to you, and we're not going to consider your opinion through the regular public hearing process. You just can't be on both sides of the issue, you know, Madam Speaker. And that's absolutely right. I was the one who introduced the bill that says no more riders on bills. And that's what I could get at that time. And I didn't write, after I said no more riders, I didn't write this and said, but you can do it on budget bill. That was there already. I didn't say, you know, let's do that, and now I'm retreating. I'm not retreating. I'm trying to move forward some more. And that's what this rule does. And you can't be on both sides of the issue. You can't convince me that you're on the issue of transparency, but you want a rule that would allow you to do things in this body without the benefit of public consultation through the public hearing process. If we do have something, if we put this rule in, and there is something that's absolutely urgent that the body has to act, why do we want to wait and do it on a budget bill? Why do we want to wait from January through October or September when the budget bill comes around and say, oh, this just came up? Well, granted, if that's the case, then you know what transparency to me would mean in that case? That when you get up and say, put this on the budget bill, and it hasn't had a public hearing, you would get up and say, notwithstanding the House rules. Let it be the exception rather than the rule. What is our rule? I say our rule should be transparency as much as possible. And as much as possible to me, I'm asking my colleagues, is require things that are unrelated to have had a public hearing. And let the exception be that when we are in a budget bill and it absolutely has to go in because something is going to happen catastrophic or whatever, or it's timely, then get up and say, I understand that we have a rule that says it has to have a public hearing, but notwithstanding the House rules, and then convince your colleagues that it is absolutely essential and you know, something bad will happen if we don't do it right then and there, if we don't put it in the budget bill. That's transparency. But obviously, somebody or we as a body want to be able to put it in there without being transparent that what we want to put in there has not had a public hearing. I'm not prohibiting putting in unrelated matters without a public hearing because you can always waive the rule. But I want that to be the exception. I want that to be transparent. That's what I would like to see. And that would be, and if it gets 8 votes, it gets 8 votes, but the public knows that we didn't have a public hearing on this, and it is absolutely essential, and it's open. Transparency is not now where we're doing things and the public is seeing us do it. It's not, transparency is not letting the public know what you're doing to them while you're doing it. To me, transparency means that in the process of legislation and issues that are going to affect the people's lives, transparency means the process allows for the input of the public prior to the decision being made by this body as the rule rather than the exception. Doing this means that transparency means we can hide it from the public and tell them later, and that would be the rule rather than the exception. So it's a difference. It may be a slightly, but to me, it's a huge gap between the two issues. And I just can't see how you can say that that's what transparent. Well, you can absolutely say anything. But I'm not convinced that with this, that we will not be able to do all these other things. I may, based upon the arguments presented, say you're right. Let us waive that rule because it is critical, and let's do it now, and I'll support your efforts. But you know what? Let's just make that motion so that when we make the motion, the public knows that it's a notwithstanding motion, it's an exception, it's critical. We'll articulate those reasons. But right now, our rule does not require that you be open with the public when you make that amendment. That's the difference. It allows people to hide. And I'm not saying that we can't do it, but do it in the open. That's why I'm not asking for everything. I'm just want to move a little further from where we, in the wisdom of the body in the 24th, for where we moved forward on transparency with regards to riders. Let's move a little bit more on transparency and say, if it's unrelated and it's on a budget bill, because everything unrelated can go in there now, at least let's have a public hearing. And by the operation of the rule, if it's really, really critical, and and it just came up, because that's the other thing. We're saying that it just came up, People talk about the high school diploma and waiving it, putting it back in during the budget bill. Did it just come up there? The governor signed a bill that waived that for entry-level positions in which the skill and the high school diploma is not needed for the skill level of the job. And we had a hearing, the governor signed it, we had testimony, and it took 6 months or 4 months from the time the bill was signed into law and the budget bill. If it was that critical that we do it, why did we wait 4 months? Why didn't we do it right then and there, because there's such a public outcry and so forth? Why did we say during the budget bill, oh, this just came up? It did not. That's why I'm saying. And if it did, then you can say, notwithstanding the House rules, I believe this is of such critical nature and it's unrelated to the budget that it needs to be put in the budget. Can I get the support? Madam Speaker, we talk about that high school bill. And of course, and it's all meant to say that there's Senator Pangilinan, he's the one who repealed that. Absolutely, I was the one. But you know what, Madam Speaker? I was also the one who put in the requirement for a high school diploma in the first place. And the reason that I did that at that time was everyone was saying that if it's too easy to drop out and you can always walk straight into a government job without a high school diploma, then you're going to stay in school. And that's how to cure the dropout rate. And what effect did it have on the dropout rate? 0. It did not decrease the dropout rate at all. So the intention there was twofold. One, of course, to ensure that we have the skill levels. And 2 is the dropout rate. How do we keep our kids in school? Well, tell them they can't have a government job. That's the policy statement. Was that a correct one? In my opinion, the intention of the bill that I had put in there did not, or the objective I had was not solved by that law. And in the meantime, in doing that, the Department of Administration already, based upon Attorney General opinion, were allowing non-high school graduates to work within the government of Guam even when the law was there. Why? Because based upon the opinion of the Attorney General and some court cases, they could not discriminate. So even before the law was repealed about the high school diploma, the practice within the government of Guam was, if he has the skill level, it's entry level, and the skills match the job description, Even if he doesn't have a high school diploma, he can still get that entry job. That was already being put in place. And so the objective plus the practical nature of the thing made that law moot and impractical. But the law served a little bit more than the objective. Or in the public's opinion, a lot more than what the original objective was, and that was the message we were sending to our children. And I agree with that message. I want that message too. I want it delivered in a manner other than that, but if that's the way that the message needs to be delivered for people to understand it, so be it. So I'm not going to shy away from that high school bill, because without my original bill, because there were no requirements for a high school diploma prior to my introduction of that bill. And I received a lot of criticism in the beginning from certain segments of the community for putting that requirement in. But I thought it had a purpose and it had an objective. And when it didn't meet that purpose and the objective, and the practical and legal nature of it was that it was not being implemented, I reversed that. The public disagreed. This body put it back, and we do have it. And again, it's because I took that initial step to have that requirement. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. The message, if all we want to do is send a message and we're not concerned about the legality of it, it's a great way to send a message, and I support it. So be it. This thing on this issue here, once again, Madam Speaker, I'm just saying that I would like this body as a statement and a commitment to the public that we will do all that we can to ensure we solicit your input before we act on issues that affect your life. And if we cannot do it because of the expediency, if we cannot waive the public hearing, like you say, because through the statute, then we can waive the rule that binds us and ties our hands by merely saying and convincing our public and our colleagues that it is of such a critical amendment that it had to wait to be put in on the budget bill in September rather than a bill in April, that it has to go in this one. It's the only time. We can't do it any other time. Then we do it and we tell the public that's why we have to do this without a public hearing. And it is the exception rather than the rule. So that to me is what I want to propose to this body and ask that the body consider. And I believe, Madam Speaker, that this is what we hear out there, that the public wants the opportunity, regardless of the issue, to approach their senators through the regular process, as well as all the other places that we meet with them, but that we follow the process of ensuring that the public's concern are gathered, are placed in a committee report, and those of us that don't attend the committee hearings can have the benefit of reading that committee report and getting the benefit of what the public's concerns are regarding the action we are going to take. Because not all of us attend public hearings. Many of us don't. And we never get that impact. And so if we just do it on the floor without the benefit of a committee report, how do we ever know what the public really are concerned about unless it's just relayed by us? And what is if we some of us who attend a public hearing missed an issue or so? And that, to me, allows us to be transparent before, during, and after. This rule, as it currently stands, without the amendment, allows us to be transparent after it's too late, after the public has not had an opportunity, and after we've done what we're going to do. And I want to be transparent since the beginning, to the middle, to the end. And so that, Madam Speaker, is the reason why I'm asking the body to consider this amendment to our standing rules. Let it be the rule that the public will be consulted on issues that affect their lives rather than the exception. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Speaker Ben. On the motion then to place Resolution 1 on third reading, are there any objections? Without any objections, so ordered. Second reading, we have resolution number 3. Senator Frank Ogden, you are recognized.
Thank you very much. Sizuz Masi, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we have a resolution number 3 that was recently introduced that would also take a look at a particular provision or 2 provisions within the standing rules and make appropriate amendments in terms of allowing the direct oversight chair over these particular aspects purview over that responsibility. Madam Speaker, if I can just highlight some of the provisions there, and with your concurrence, I'd like to make an amendment prior to any additional discussions, because this is the anticipated amendment is in collaboration with some of our good colleagues on both sides of the aisle in terms of trying to enhance the proposed amendment and allowing for the appropriate oversight as it applies to the use of general funds to be a part of this entire equation. But Madam Speaker, this is resolution number 3 would in one section 6.04.04.02, dealing with appropriations, allow for any bills on bonds of any nature shall be referred to the Committee on Economic Development, the Judiciary, and Health. And as the chair of that particular committee, I'm requesting consideration on the part of the members of this august body on that amendment. The additional section makes reference to section 6.04.04.03 as it deals directly again with legislative appropriations, and it highlights that any bills appropriating solely for the judicial branch, and it continues to read, it deletes the word jointly, allows for that particular referral to the Committee on Economic Development, Judiciary, and Health. I'm requesting the consideration of our members here, Madam Speaker, primarily because I think that as we look at this entire process, and with all due respect to the provisions contained in the existing standing rules, I'd like to have oversight and purview in terms of looking and ensuring that at least as it applies to my agencies and the responsibilities that I have, that I can proceed accordingly with that process. Madam Speaker, I'm going to make this fairly quick because like I shared with you a little earlier, I had an opportunity to discuss just briefly this provision with a number of our colleagues. But I'd like to move for, if I may, just have someone circulate this particular amendment, Madam Speaker. I apologize. I thought it was being circulated.
Can you please distribute the amendments?
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and with the indulgence, I know that it's still being circulated
One
shortly.
moment, the others haven't received
Okay.
it yet.
Thank you.
Senator Calvo, you have your hand up. You have
Yeah,
a point of...
Madam Speaker, again, I'm looking at the resolution and seeing that there are 2 separate amendments to the standing rules. Now, I'm just wondering whether it would be better if we divide the question in this matter so that, again, there may be differences with the resolution in its totality, and maybe it would be wise if we could reconstruct it and divide the question so that there may be some senators that may have a viewpoint, an issue on one particular change and the other. So again, I'm moving that we divide the question, in particular to the resolution.
We would, when we get to that point, you can pose that motion, but the senator right now is just still proffering the amendment. So, yes.
On the first part?
Yes, and that's being passed out. You may proceed, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In all due respect to the request of our colleague from Mighty, I'd like to, Madam Speaker, in terms of dividing the questions, I have absolutely no problems in entertaining them separately. But Madam Speaker, in terms of, as you look at the amendment and the primary amendment of containing resolution number 3 and the proposed amendment, this proposed amendment would replace the second whereas clause within that resolution. And it would read further that any bills on bonds of any nature shall be referred to the Committee on Economic Development, Judiciary, and Health, semicolon, to be added, provided that bills on bonds whose payment source is the general fund shall be referred sequentially, first to the Committee on Economic Development, Judiciary, and Health, and next to the Committee on Appropriations. And Madam Speaker, I am proffering this particular amendment because of some of the input that was provided, and obviously having heard from the previous chairman of Ways and Means, and also briefly consulting with the Committee on Appropriations Chair. I think it's only proper that there's direct recognition that any bonds that would directly allocate or extract and use the general fund as a source would appropriately should appropriately go to that particular committee that oversees all of the general funds within the government of Guam. So, Madam Speaker, I think that that's pretty much self-explanatory, with the exception of any other bonds that would fall under the jurisdiction of the committee that would come directly to the committee itself. Unless there's any questions, Madam Speaker, I'm going to make this fairly brief, unusually, but I'd like to request the consideration of my colleagues to please support these particular proposals, and in particular the amendment that has been proffered. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
On the amendment, are there any speakers? Speaker Ben, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. You know, Madam Speaker, in the previous resolution, many of my colleagues got up and said, but that's how it's done in other areas or other places, and that's why we shouldn't change that. You know, and why should we do something different with regards to the subject matter on that resolution? Well, boy, we sure are breaking barriers here, because on this one, it's the first time we've ever been doing this, that we would actually have the rules adopted, and then before we even get to work, things get changed with regards to the jurisdictions of the committee. This is the first time that it's ever been adopted. And we have to ask ourselves why. Why is this, and why is it with just one single committee? And why is it that we're extracting what would have been proposed as a streamlined process, a joint hearing, one report, because it all affects the finances of this government? Why do we need to extract this now and make it a little bit disjointed so that it's no longer as coherent as it can be under a joint process? What makes this necessary? And that's the question I'm asking, you know. Why is this necessary? And they're probably going to say, because, you know, Ben, you're stubborn, or I don't know. I don't know what could make it necessary. But we haven't even had one hearing to show that the joint process is not going to work, and we're already going to change it. And it's the first time we're doing it. It's not like we've always done before, you know. So why are we doing it? Well, you know, Madam Speaker, everybody's going to have to answer to why do they want to do this. And I'll make it work. No matter what you do, I'll make it work. So don't get me wrong that if I can't have that way, it's not going to work. It'll work. I will make this issue work no matter which way we go. But the question is, why are we doing it? Why is it absolutely necessary to now extract a joint hearing process in which all the members can come together of the different committees, consider the totality of the impact, both from the special fund side, no, not even the special fund side, just the general fund side. Why does it have to be disjointed? What makes it so necessary to undo something that had been adopted by this body before we even started working with it? And, you know, call me paranoid, but maybe it is me. But I say, don't worry, my colleagues. Whatever we decide to do, I will make it work. But I just want to caution the members of my colleagues that if this is the type of game we're going to be playing in this body, and this is the standard of behavior we're going to set for ourselves, that you may be next. When you put an issue forth that may somehow make 8 people mad, they're going to come and just say that process is not working, and we're just going to take that away from you. We're going to leave you out of the process, or not make it joint anymore and make it separate, and we'll do this and you'll have to do this. Why not do it together? We're playing games here. It's a dangerous game, but I'll make it work. But I'm just cautioning that the standard of behavior in this body with this kind of movement, I think, is certainly sinking to a low. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, Speaker Ben.
Madam Speaker, I apologize. Can I just bring up a point of personal privilege? I think that some of the statements that the immediately preceding speaker made in reference to the amendment that is being proffered and the resolution itself, I think it has direct ramifications in terms of looking at any member here and applying that statement. And I'm taking it personally as the chair. It's a kind request for reconsideration to give me that opportunity to be able to carry out this responsibility. And there's absolutely nothing being hidden. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Your point is well taken. Senator Calvo, you are recognized.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, again, I was concerned on the original language that's put forth on Resolution Number 3. It was in the past legislature a little less complicated for me because I held the title of Chairman of the Committee on Finance and Taxation, but I also had the Chairmanship of Economic Development. And with my Office of Finance and Budget, when we dealt with a bond, and whether it was a revenue bond or a GO bond, you basically had the same folks working in the same office that dealt with the issues of a particular bond indenture. You know, the concern I had, of course, is specifically on the areas in a general obligation, because as a finance chair, if you do not have some input or do not have primary input on a general obligation type of bond, it will have, you know, it's going to have an impact on either that year or future years' appropriations. And so based on that original language, you know, I was concerned because, again, to have it put under the auspices of one committee that does not have general overview over the whole budgetary process, there's a problem. At least now when I look at this particular amendment, I have no objections to the amendment. The amendment, at least for the point of the general fund or in bonds such as a general obligation bond, there is this sequential referral of bills. So, and I would assume then if there is another general obligation bond floated, the referral by committee rules would go to the Committee on Economic Development, Judiciary and Health. Once they've dispensed with that bill, then it would move to the Committee on Appropriations, and whatever bill and whatever context that was. In fact, I'm not too sure on how this would work, whether the committee would submit a report and an amended report or bill, and then it's referred to the Committee on Ways and Means, and then from there the Committee on Ways and Means can be the ultimate mover or amender of that bill. I'm not too sure the details of that because this is something that was not a part of the standing rules of the bills of the legislatures I've been in the past. But at least with this floor amendment as presented, I see that where Ways and Means will have the ultimate movement or the ultimate authority to dispense and move that bill forward. So I feel a little bit more comfortable. And with that, Madam Speaker, I'm for the amendment. It's a big improvement on, at least in my opinion, having been there on the current language we have on Resolution Number 3. And to close, Madam Speaker, I don't think we need a division of the question because this is not an amendment. I just was talking to Rules Chair. This is a resolution, and it's not just an amendment on the standing rules. So I don't think there will be a proper protocol or procedures to call for a division of the question. Anyway, I rise in support of this amendment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator Calvo. Are there any other speakers then on the amendment? Senator Adai, you are recognized.
Madam Speaker, just a point of inquiry. Earlier we were discussing resolution number 1, which would basically require that any amendments that we make to the appropriations bill must be only limited to subject matter that has had a public hearing previously. However, we are now discussing resolution number 3, which still then allows for the introduction of amendments that have not had the benefit of a public hearing. So I guess I'm posing this question to the legal counsels that we got to resolve, because if, for example, if resolution number 1 does pass, and so does resolution number 3, now we have 2 portions of the standing rules that are conflicting with each other. And I guess this, and maybe before we actually, make the final disposition on these 2 resolutions, Legislative Council is going to need to clarify this for us. Thank you.
We're going to, legal counsel, one of the legal counsel is not here, so we're going to take a minute recess so that then we can have joint counsels then discuss this.
You said he's going to hear an answer, and then you say you have 3 lawyers. You never get the same answer from 3 lawyers. You never get the same answer from 3 different lawyers. One wants to create one, that's why I'm thinking. That's why I'm thinking.
The legislature is back in session. Senator Adai, I want to make sure that your question was sufficiently resolved by legal counsels.
Yes, Madam Speaker, thank you.
So on the motion, are there any other speakers? Then Senator Frank Agun will give you the opportunity again as the author or mover to close.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Actually, just very briefly, I want to thank the Chair of Ways and Means or Appropriations and also my colleagues across the aisle for collaborating on this, and I request consideration and support for the resolution. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Senator Calvo had withdrawn his earlier motion to divide the question, so you don't have anything else to discuss on page 2 of the other whereas? No. Okay, so on the motion then to accept the amendment here, are there any objections? No objections? So ordered. Now on the motion then to place resolution number 3 on the third reading file, are there any objections? There being no objections, so ordered. Majority Leader, Senator Respicio. We're going to take a minute recess. The legislature is back in session. Senator Respicio, I recognize you for a motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I guess we've exhausted the second reading file, and you brought us down to the voting file?
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. So I move that we vote for Resolutions 1 and Resolution 3 without engrossment.
On the motion, then without any objections, so ordered. We are now in the voting file. Ask clerk to please read Committee on Rules Resolution number 1. Sergeant at Arms, please make sure the members are in the hall because we are voting. Senator Calvo and Senator Spauldon.
What? I'm gonna miss going back to my office eating a meal. Now I can't walk.
You're welcome anytime to your
I'll bring my lunch.
Dr. J,
Hey, that was good.
can Senator Cabo use your bathroom when we're in session?
The legislature is back in session. All of the members are in the session hall. I'm going to ask the clerk to please read the first resolution, resolution number 1.
Committee on Rules, Resolution Number 1, introduced by VC Pangilinan, relative to amending Rule 6, Section 6.04.06, Imina 30 na Liheslaturan Guåhan Standing Rules.
Roll call. Yes.
Yes.
Senator Tenorio?
Rules Resolution Number 1 received 7 yeas, 8 nays. Rules Resolution Number 1 failed to get the required votes. Resolution Number 1, Rules Resolution Number 3, I'm sorry.
Resolution Number 3, COR, introduced by F.B. Agun Jr. An act to amending Section 6.04.04.02 and Section 6.04.04.03 of Imina 30 na Liheslaturan Guåhan o din na Reglamento 30th Guam Legislature Standing Rules.
Roll call.
Senator Adai? Senator Agun? Senator Blas? Senator Calvo? Senator Benjamin Cruz? Senator Espadon? Senator Guthert? Senator Munya Barnes? Senator Palacios? Speaker Pangilinan? Senator Rector? Senator Respicio? Senator Taitagui? Senator Tenorio? Speaker Wampat?
No. No.
Senator Espadon? Senator Rector?
Resolution number 3, COR received 12 yeas and 3 nay votes. Resolution number 3 is duly passed. Senator Respicio. Are you guys twins, by the way? Motion
Thank
to-
you, Madam Speaker. I move that we adjourn, subject to the call of the Speaker.
Okay, on the motion to adjourn without objections, we are adjourned, subject to the call of the Speaker.